You're listening to WonderLabs, filling your ear holes with nerdy goodness.
Hello and welcome to WonderLabs. I'm Chris Richardson.
And I'm Ellie Mackay.
Today we're talking with Dr. Duncan Fraser. Duncan is a researcher at Oxford University, and he's researching new ways to synthesize plastics. In this episode, we learn more about his work in the field of efficient plastic production.
We hear about his research on something called olefin polymerization. We explore the pros and cons of possible plastic alternatives, and we debate the benefits of collaborating with industry.
With plastic pollution being a hot topic at the moment, it's important to hear from experts like Duncan who can guide us through the issue and its possible solutions.
Plastic pollution is something I've worked on a lot in other projects, so this was a great opportunity to hear from someone working in the field, and we hope you enjoy it too.
Dr. Duncan Fraser.
Nearly. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. To kick things off, could you tell us a bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I did my undergrad at Imperial, graduated a couple of years ago, then I've been doing my PhD in Oxford, both in chemistry and then inorganic chemistry, and I just handed in my thesis a couple of days ago.
Woohoo!
So,
yeah.
Congratulations!
Congratulations.
Fantastic.
So for the rest of the episode, we're going to call him Dr. Duncan.
Dr. Duncan.
I think so.
Does that sound strange to you, Dr. Duncan?
Definitely. And I haven't done a Viva yet, so I'm still an imposter. But
Right.
Fake Dr. Duncan.
yeah, exactly.
So
Amazing.
what was the topic of your PhD?
We were looking at some non-standard polymerization catalysts. So non-standard catalysts that you'd use to make plastics.
Okay.
So most catalysts that you'd use, they have two handles that they can use to grab and incorporate the monomers that go into the plastic material. And I was looking at catalysts that only had a single handle. And so this is kind of like an esoteric explanation, but it has quite interesting implications for the kind of applications that you can use these plastics for.
Cool. And we'll come onto those applications in a bit for sure.
So just to take it back a step, can you explain what you mean by the two handles and the single handles?
So you could be building a daisy chain, right? And you have a pile of daisies, and you, the daisy chain builder, you're going to pick up a daisy, insert it in, and it's going to increase by one daisy. And so here I am responsible for every insertion and all of that growth. The other way that you could imagine building a chain is like having a line of gunpowder, and you take a match, light the bit that's closest to you, and that flame propagates away from you.
Okay.
And so here, you are only providing the initiation.
Right.
Okay.
And
So you're triggering a self-propelling, like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right.
And
that's
so
cool.
almost all of this class of plastics that are the most abundant plastics, called polyolefins, they're made like a daisy chain. So you're constantly doing everything, whereas what I've been working on was a way that we could do it like a domino.
So it's almost like an automation in a way, right?
So you're massively increasing the efficiency of production of these very common plastics.
That would be nice, but there are limitations of both routes. The reason why the most commonly way that we do it like a daisy chain is that it is actually super efficient.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, it is very efficient. And so this would have different applications for different reasons, but probably won't ever overtake the original for its kind of purpose. Yeah.
So it's quite a niche, specialised method.
Definitely for the moment.
Okay.
But hopefully it will have some interesting applications that you really couldn't access with this older method.
All right.
And so we should probably just clarify, because you mentioned olefins.
Yeah.
Right? We should just clarify what those are in terms of the categories, because that's including things like polythene, right?
Exactly.
So we can frame this in what I believe is the overall area of your research, which is the synthesis of permethylpentylene complexes for olefin oligomerization and polymerization.
Oh, it sounds so good.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So permethylpentylene, this is the scaffold that we use to create the catalyst. In practice, when we're talking about a catalyst, it's a metal, but we want an individual metal ion. And so we need to put some kind of scaffold around it to make it active, to make it do the things that we want to do. Permethylpentylene is that scaffold.
Okay.
The olefin, this is the monomer that goes into our polymer. So there are tons of different olefins we can use to make different polymers. Polyethylene, polypropylene, these are the two most common plastics. Yeah.
And it's, at current statistics, 80 million tonnes a year?
For polyethylene alone, yeah.
Which is incredible.
So absolutely massive.
All right.
What's the difference between oligomerization and polymerization?
Oligomerization is where you only combine a small number of the monomers together. So a lot of the fuel that we use is actually taken from much smaller component parts, and you oligomerize these very small parts into liquid fractions that go into gasoline and diesel and things.
Yeah, so it really is very common.
Ubiquitous.
As we said. One of the most common plastics certainly is within that category.
Yeah, so what exactly, could you tell us what those plastics are and a bit about their properties?
Yeah, like Ellie was saying, they are just about everywhere.
Yeah.
Building materials, packaging materials is another huge application that's very durable, chemically resistant, long-lasting, which can be a negative impact when they get released into the environment. But this is a really good thing when it comes to the actual product applications. And so they can be used in coatings and paints in your smartphone, in your computer. They're all over the place.
Are there any places that they exist that we might not expect them to exist?
Ooh.
I have one.
Okay, you go first.
Okay, tea bags.
Whoa.
Yeah.
There's
Did
plastic.
you?
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Olefin fibers. They're
Yeah.
used to make tea bags because they're thermally resistant. And people don't realise that. But yeah, your tea bags have plastics in them.
That is nuts.
Yeah, which is terrifying. It's terrible. And
I am shocked and appalled.
what is it about these particular plastics that make them chemically resistant and colour fast and durable and so on?
So they're just very simple molecules that consist almost entirely of just carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds. Okay. So these are quite strong bonds, but maybe more than that, they're non-polar bonds. So there's not very much kind of for chemistry to latch onto. Normally you would want some kind... So polarity, this is a separation of charge. So partial positive, partial negative charge.
It sort of makes the molecules sort of sticky.
Yeah, sticky, and gives a route for something to react with it. Yeah.
Okay.
And so these, they just don't have that.
And that's exactly what we want from them.
Exactly, because that makes them durable, it makes them chemically resistant. The thermal properties, I guess, is kind of related because you have, again, these strong bonds, so it means that you can heat them up to very high temperatures and then they become soft and malleable, and it's only once you get up to about 400 degrees that you'll start to see any decomposition.
Yeah.
So you really have to roast them.
Yeah.
Because, of course, plastic comes from the Greek...
Plastikos.
Thank you. Which means...
Capable of being shaped or moulded.
Nerd moment there.
Which I love, yeah.
So you have this product which is both incredibly durable and resistant, but malleable and moldable, and plastic. And so that obviously is why it's so successful and so useful.
Yeah.
So what is it about these particular hydrocarbons, if they're these simple bonds, that means that they can have such varied properties?
Right, okay, so plastics are macromolecules, and so in order to understand the properties, you can't just look at this microscopic idea of this carbon is bonded to this carbon. You have to think in a kind of bigger scale. So polyethylene, this is just a zigzag chain. There's nothing sticking out, so just like a pure zigzag straight line. Polypropylene, which is the second most commonly produced polyolefin, this has one carbon atom that sticks up for each monomer, and so you now have a zigzag chain with these kind of pillars that are sticking up. These pillars, they can kind of catch on each other.
So that's sort of like very Velcro-y.
More Velcro-y, exactly, yeah. And so this means polypropylene, you can heat to a higher temperature before it will start to become melty and before you can start to reshape it.
Got it.
But I think this is really interesting as well, because these are the things that we learn in A-level chemistry, right? You learn these kind of basic structures and so on, but what you're doing is taking that basic structural knowledge and obviously then much more complex knowledge on top and making it something really relevant and applicable.
That's it. So it's all built on these really simple chemical ideas that just get blown up all out of proportion.
Yeah, so with that in mind as well then, plastics have been around now for over 100 years, and the kinds of plastics that we're working with now, how are they different to things like, Bakelite of the early 1900s?
Much cheaper to make, much easier to make. Yeah, you have these advantages of thermal resistivity and chemical resistivity, and these are very nice properties to have.
If you look at like Tupperware from the 60s, it feels very different.
Yeah.
Is that because it's a different chemical composition? Or?
So, in broad brushstrokes, the Tupperware is probably very similar to the Tupperware that we had before, but they'll have different additives, and these kind of plasticizers and these additives, they can improve the colour fastness, they can improve the kind of the oxidative stability, how long it will hang around before it starts to decompose.
So there's been quite a lot of changes, a lot of evolution in the actual properties of those plastics over time. Yeah,
in the kind of tinkering around with that formulation that comes at the end. Bakelite and polyolefins, these are quite different, but actually since about 1930 was when the first polyolefin was developed. This is butyl rubber, or isobutene, polyisobutene. Then in the 50s we had like polyethylene, polypropylene and things. And these basically are the same plastics that we have had. Yeah, most of the development has come in our ability to process them in better ways, to improve our moulding techniques and things like that.
And you mentioned additives, plasticizers or stabilizers, that sort of thing. Yeah. Presumably those are what's changed, because the actual hydrocarbon zigzag, for example, is still the same molecule. Yeah. So you're just adding on different chemical ingredients. That definitely
has been a big development. I guess the other one, maybe my first answer was a little overly simplistic, but I guess one of the other big developments has been our ability to control the macromolecular structure of the polymer a lot better. So where before we would have a huge variation in chain lengths and the amount of branching that we might have along that chain, we can now control that a lot better. We can decide, we want a chain that is 1 million carbon atoms long. We want a chain that is very highly branched.
So to what level of precision can you get that to?
Ooh. Okay, depends very much on the plastic material. So say for polyethylene, you could get, everything is a distribution. It's extremely difficult to get a sharp line, like everything is 1,000 carbon atoms long. But you can get quite narrow distributions that might be spread over, say, a standard deviation over about 100, 150,000 carbon atoms.
Okay. Which is, in terms of size and scale, that's pretty close.
It's pretty good.
There is definitely in some other types of polymers that you'd be working with, there's this idea called living polymerization.
Ooh.
And which
sounds exciting.
It does sound exciting. Tell us more, Dr. Duncan.
Living polymerization, it's this idea that you can control termination, which is what might give you varied chain lengths, so that you should have monodisperse, so this is very nice, sharp polymer molecular weight. Yeah. In practice, it's extremely difficult to do because you're having to control termination and the rates at which your chain is growing, because if you have different rates of growth, then things are going to be different lengths. But we can do it for some monomers. Polyethylene, as far as I know, we can't do it very well for.
Okay. Right. The words that you're using are very similar to those of genetics, of like increasing chain length and termination and running along a chain and controlling the length and so on.
I guess genetics, I mean the DNA, it is a polymeric molecule, it has a lot of the same concepts at its heart.
I wonder if some of the building proteins and enzymes that are used to kind of attach onto certain sites on DNA could be modified to become like bioorganic plastic synthesizers.
Yeah. Ooh. I think that would be a super interesting. I'm sure someone must have done it.
Someone somewhere. We'll get them on the show.
Yeah.
Amazing. You're talking about these improvements in being able to increase the branching or the termination length and so on. How much of that is to do with the tools, the mechanics of what you're using with computer modelling, or is there particular developments in actual physical machines that you're using?
So my feeling is that we've just been doing it for a really long time and we've learned what not and what to do.
Okay.
We've just tried.
It's a very honest response from a scientist there. Yeah. I like
that. It has been traditionally
trial and error.
Yeah.
It's traditionally been one of the most intensively studied areas of my field of catalysis, and I work in organometallic catalysis more specifically.
You must be really good at Scrabble.
If only there was a Z in there. Organometallics.
He's really good at articulate.
Triple word score. Yeah, that's it. Articulate.
We have just tried a ton of stuff, and most of it has been terrible, but some of it turns out has been good at doing very specific things. So, for example, branching, we weren't that good at controlling until kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, and then we discovered this new system, did it really well, and that's set this whole branch, this whole other branch of chemistry.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And what's your day like? What's your lab like? Do you wear a lab coat? Is there beakers everywhere, or is it computer modelling? Or
no. So the stuff that we do is all air sensitive chemistry, which means if it comes into contact with air, best case scenario, it's going to go off. Worst case scenario, it's going to set on fire.
What do you mean by?
So it will oxidize.
Okay.
Or
it spoils.
It will be hydrolyzed.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, but spoils.
So, and so you're doing everything with those in those sort of chambers with the gloves.
Yeah. So glove boxes are super important.
So you do wear gloves.
We definitely wear gloves.
That's good.
Yeah. We also, glove boxes are kind of a precious commodity. Less so in the US. US, they have tons of them. Here, precious commodity.
Fun fact.
here we also do a lot of stuff in the sealed vessels, everything under an inert gas like nitrogen, and we're kind of transferring liquids here and filtering things there, but nothing comes into contact with there. So actually beakers aren't that useful for us because it's difficult to keep a beaker isolated from oxygen and moisture.
So now I have this image of like quite space sciencey with all the kind of hazmat suits and you going...
I'm going to leave you with that image of it. It sounds better than it.
It sounds really cool.
I think it'd be even better if the entire room was actually oxygen free and you had your own oxygen tank or something.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Can they do that? Genuinely, why don't they do that? Like scuba gear.
Yeah.
And then you're all sitting in the lab in scuba gear. That's a great idea.
With flippers and a wetsuit.
Yeah, still have the wetsuit on.
Oh no, I accidentally punctured my oxygen suit.
Oh yeah.
Now I guess
that would be a good film.
Yeah.
All right, so moving forward then, there is often this debate around should we really be focusing on plastics and improving those processes or switching away from plastics entirely into alternatives?
Yeah, so the problem is plastics are just super useful. They're kind of unparalleled in the cost of their production and their durability. It's just such an easy thing to go for if you're designing a product.
Yeah.
It comes with a cost.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
with my environmental hat on...
When you ever not wearing an environmental hat?
It's a lot bigger than I was expecting.
For our listeners, Ellie's wearing a giant hat. Fashioned out of hemp. And kale chips.
Bamboo and kale chips. How dare you? No, but surely, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because surely the excuse of...
Angel's advocate.
Angel's advocate. Surely the excuse that, it's the easiest way and it's super useful... We have a responsibility to our future generations and to the planet to do things not necessarily that are the easiest or the quickest or the cheapest, but to do things that are the right thing to do in terms of protecting our planet.
Yes.
So should we not be putting brilliant minds like yours into developing alternative uses for plastics?
I do agree in principle. I do agree, right? But
we're going to have fisticuffs here in the studio.
We're very fortunate to be in a very wealthy part of the world in kind of absolute terms. When we're thinking about the environmental impacts of our plastic waste, a lot of it actually comes not from this richer Western democracy. It's coming from middle income and low income countries who maybe don't have the same municipal waste disposal systems, the same recycling infrastructure that we have.
Absolutely.
And so for them, you're right. R&D, I think, would be very well spent investigating new materials.
Yeah. But you do make a good point there, and this is something that one of the projects I work on is as mission director of the Plastic Tide, and we're looking at all different angles to solve the plastics problem because it is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And we've got millions and millions and millions of tons of plastic in the ocean and on the land that shouldn't be there, and we're still churning out millions of tons of new plastics every day. And yes, one of those issues as well, the waste management and the recycling needs to be improved because even if we stop making it, we've still got to deal with cleaning up all the plastics that are currently in the ocean. You know, we can sit here and say, oh, well, we're not the problem. It's you know, India and Indonesia and the Philippines because they are producing a huge amount of waste. But the UK is filthy. The beaches in the UK are disgraceful, and we are producing a huge amount. And we do have, as you said, we have the resources for waste management. So we should be setting a good example and being the role models and providing the development and the research to produce sustainable, biodegradable, plant-based plastics, which then we can fund and outsource and donate out to these other
even
people.
the waste management solutions. I mean, up until really recently, we've been exporting a huge amount of our plastics waste to China because they would buy it off us. In January 1st, they finally stopped taking it. The fact that we've been offloading our kind of waste management responsibilities on what is a comparatively poorer country, that seems like a nuts thing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Not just us, but many other countries have been doing.
It's the wrong way around completely.
But I do think, maybe this is more a general point about the way polymerization investigations have been funded. Because the traditional olefin polymerization has been so well studied, it's a very safe thing to try and bid for funding. You know that if you do it and you get it, you can make some catalysts, you can publish some papers, you can demonstrate that you've had this output. And so this has kind of become this self-fulfilling prophecy where tons of people just do it. And even if you don't explicitly put in funding for it, if you make something that doesn't work for what you originally intended, we understand this chemistry very well. So just quick do a little bit of polymerization chemistry. So I think hopefully these more modern polymerization investigations, they can get to a similar stage. But it is just so ubiquitous at the moment.
We've got roads made from recycled plastics now.
Yeah.
Plastic-eating bacteria.
Yeah.
We've got obviously clothes made from recycled plastic. The jeans I'm wearing are made from recycled ocean plastics.
The home spiralizer where you can
Oh
take
yeah, that's
plastic.
cool.
What?
Yeah. So you take, sort of like when one is making courgette and you that spiralizer.
When one is That's the most pretentious sentence I've ever heard. When one is
But
making...
the spiralizer, so it weaves the courgette into this nice thread of spaghetti. You can get something that basically takes a water bottle and turns it into this thread that
like
you can
fishing
use.
line.
Yeah, precisely.
okay.
Really strong thread that you can then use to whatever you want.
Yeah, and I guess it's just there's more innovative and interesting technologies emerging all the time to help.
Definitely.
But what I would say, and there are so many fantastic technologies, and we'll put some links to some of the coolest projects, whether that's ocean cleanup projects or recycled, new materials. And of course, there's a lot of plant-based materials now. You get plastic bags made from cassava roots and potatoes and things like that. Or my watch strap, which is made from pineapple leather.
If you get hungry,
It matches my hemp hat, my environmental. I wanted to ask you if you know anything about like the plastic-eating bacteria.
Yeah.
Those sorts of projects. Are they feasible? Because we hear a lot on, we see them on social media of like a new type of plastic made from hemp or whatever.
Yeah.
And it sounds too good to be true. And for me as an environmentalist, I think, why aren't we doing that? Why don't we ban all plastics and why don't we switch to these plant-based cornstarch packaging?
Yes. Yeah.
As a plastics expert, can you maybe dispel those myths or tell us what the truth is? And
Yeah. Okay, I guess we'll start with the plastic-eating bacteria.
Okay.
They do consume the plastic, and they can use the plastic as their only food source.
That's so cool.
They're super cool. The issue with them is there are a few issues. So
go ahead.
This is good. This is your soapbox moment to destroy all the hopeful environmentalists.
It's really important, and we definitely need to do more work on it, right? Because this is
absolutely.
a really, like you're saying, we have, even if we do turn off the tap, right?
Yeah.
In this analogy, we still have a ton of plastic waste that we need to deal with.
Several million
right?
tons.
Yeah, exactly.
1 billion tons.
Billions and
maybe
billions
more.
of tons.
So yeah, these alleviation strategies are still really important. They're still not rapid, and they work better for some types of plastics than others.
Right.
So what was particularly exciting about some of these recent findings was that they could digest non-polar polyolefins, right? So these are the things, there's no polarity, there's nothing for things to latch onto.
Right.
And so the fact that they can use that as their sole food source, this is very important. They can only still really attack the ends of the chains of the plastic effectively.
Okay.
And so the problem is if we have these chains that are 1 million carbon atoms long, they're only attacking it from the outside in.
Right.
And so it's still an extremely slow process.
Right.
What would be much nicer, or what would be a very useful thing to have, and what we hope will be a future direction that we can take the work that I've been doing during the PhD in, is that we want a way to be able to cleave these very long chains into smaller chains so that we have more chain
Multiple
ends.
ends.
Exactly.
So that's the same as, again, going back to DNA, that's the same as splicing your DNA into smaller sections so that you can get multiple attachment sites.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so cool. Science is awesome.
That's why we're in this business. And I think as well, I mean, just to for me, one thing that the plastic-eating bacteria highlights really well is just this ability for life to thrive everywhere and on anything.
Mother Nature's fighting back by just eating everything we're producing.
I quite like that as a metaphor as well.
So do you see that as being viable in the long term, in the future, if there's enough sort of further research into it?
I think
it's not just a gimmicky thing.
What will be more likely is that we dig into how those bacteria are actually consuming the plastic. And I think what we'll want to do is dig into the enzyme. Almost certainly it's going to be an extraordinarily expensive thing to try and produce this enzyme en masse to digest the plastic. But we might be able to look at how the enzyme is functioning. What metals does it have in it? How is the scaffold around it? Can we produce an inorganic mimic that would do that so that we could, take that into a plant? Why not do this in massive vats rather than just like sprinkling landfill with mealworms, right? So I'm obviously coming at this from a slightly biased inorganic chemistry point of view, because this is what we do. Sure. I'm sure if you spoke to a bioinorganic chemist, they'd say, yeah, we can definitely do this. Just give us like 10 years and $1 million. But I think probably what would be more practical is digging further into it. I think the other thing that you mentioned was this idea of including biological material, like plant-based material, which is definitely a good thing. That the big advantage it has is that you increase the rate of biodegradation because you're no longer as hydrophobic. So a lot of the plastics we make, they're very hydrophobic. So that means water repellent. And water repellent things, it's very difficult for a biofilm to form. And so this is the first step that would happen when your bacteria are digesting large macromolecules like polymers. So biological things, much easier for the biofilm to form. So they degrade much quicker, but they tend not to recycle as well. So less impact in 400 years' time, but it's very difficult to turn them into another plastic type material. So for example, you can include starch into a polyolefin cup and then it will degrade much quicker. But you can't recycle that starch impregnated plastic cup because this is now they call it like the Pringle problem. You've now created this compound material that has lots of different bits in it.
So what exactly is biodegradability? What does that mean?
So there is like an official test that is called the Ready Biodegradability Test. There is some set parameters that thing has to meet under very specific conditions that it will say degrade in 12 weeks. But it's like an EU mandated test that we have to...
And this is the issue with a lot of misunderstanding, that people buy products thinking it's biodegradable and they think, oh, that's great, I can throw that in the ocean. But actually, it would have to be at a certain temperature, at the right salinity, at the right pH, in anoxic environment, or anaerobic environment, in order to be fully biodegradable. In the ocean, where it's cold and salty and oxygenated, actually it doesn't biodegrade. So it's just as bad as any other.
And there is this huge difference between landfill and ocean in terms of how things are going to break down.
So actually what you want is compostable materials in the bottom of a landfill, gradually breaking down organically, perhaps with the use of these plastic-eating bacteria in the future.
I mean, so there's a certain class of plastics that are derived from agricultural feedstocks. So they're no longer derived from petroleum and fossil fuels like most other plastics. And you ferment them and then you do some of the chemistry. You get this thing called polylactic acid. So lactic acid, like the stuff when you exercise too hard. And the polylactic acid is compostable. It decomposes very quickly. It's one of these new wonder plastic materials that hopefully we'll be doing a lot more research on in the future, like as a chemistry community. It's if you've seen those things that are like vegware, you know, those coffee cup lids, that kind of stuff, you'll see those 3 letters, PLA, polylactic acid. And these are these very nice compostable plastic materials.
And is that in terms of the properties of the resistance and so on that makes plastic so good, does the PLA have the same? Is it as good?
This is one of the big research areas, that it is very difficult to combine these dual features of biodegradability and chemical resistance because things they're opposite.
Diametrically opposed. So could you come up with a way to have a plastic that has almost an inbuilt obsolescence, the same way that our iPhones will break after a year, or a month after the warranty. We have a lot of products that, as we know, that they build in, a timed, kind of timed failure point. Could you have a material that, when it's being used in a household environment, when you're drinking your coffee cup or something, is very stable and robust, but as soon as you throw it away, or 6 weeks or 12 weeks or however long, it sort of has a half-life that breaks down and then suddenly very rapidly degrades? Is that possible?
These are actually some ideas that people are trying at the moment, trying to put these timed devices... Exactly, and so it will start to decompose over time. The bit that we're really excited about is that when you are able to build these polyolefin chains, you can incorporate these additives within the polymer backbone itself that will make it biodegrade a lot quicker. But you add it, rather than adding it after it's been made, you add it while it's being made. So the problem is the way that we've been traditionally making plastics, they're not very oxygen tolerant, but we need oxygen in the backbone if we're going to make it biodegradable. And this is what this whole redesign of the catalyst might allow us to do. Hopefully will allow us to do.
All right.
So that is, you are actually kind of building in the self-destructive property.
That's it. You build in these weak points within the polymer backbone that can be, broken down by water, by bacteria, these kinds of things.
That's really cool.
So you increase the number of chain ends and then you can degrade it a lot quicker.
And at what point of the research is that? Does that currently exist, or is it very
So what we've done, in order to do that, we've kind of had to redesign bottom up the way that we're building these polyolefins. So what we've been able to do is make them the new way. And now what we need to do is we need to take this and start including these additives, finding the additives that are compatible and figuring out a way that we can do it that isn't going to impact the amount of it we can make too dramatically. The thing that will make a polymer chain biodegradable, it's called an ester bond. So when you've heard of polyesters, the stuff that your cheap suit is made out of, like it's the same thing.
I only have cheap suits.
I just got a new blanket that's made of it. It's super soft. But it's you can either have polyesters that have benzene rings, they're not biodegradable. If it doesn't have a benzene ring, polyesters are biodegradable.
Okay.
So the challenge is oxygen is incompatible with these other ways of making plastics almost all of the time, certainly to get them into the backbone. So yeah, this is the big challenge. How can we incorporate ester linkages into polyolefins to make them biodegradable?
That's fantastic.
Got it.
That's really cool.
It's not a new idea. People have been thinking about this for a really long time. Originally, the kind of chemistry they were doing was including oxidants in the plastic material as part of that processing that I was talking about.
Right, so the plastic spoils like food.
Exactly.
So you open your fridge and you go, oh no, my yogurt's gone off because the yogurt pot has melted.
Only, I guess, over the course of decades rather than, so it's still...
But could we speed that up? Could you make a plastic which will suddenly start melting after 3 weeks? So that our single-use plastics...
I wonder what the limitation of it is.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Because I guess what you're trying to balance if you're creating that plastic is a production limitation with a practical application, because you want to be able to make this thing at scale, transport it long distances, maybe even keep some stock for you. So I guess there's probably some limitation to it.
I suppose in an ideal world, right?
Yeah. Well,
even maybe not in an ideal world, but if you were, say, walking along and drinking a water bottle and then you finish drinking it and you could just throw it into the bushes and
it just disintegrates.
Wouldn't that be perfect?
Perfectly
Wouldn't it be cool?
biodegraded.
Could you get it so it has a little switch that somehow changes the properties, so that when you're finished, you just press a button or like hold the base of it or something, and then it just disintegrates. That would be cool.
It would.
But what if you hit it by mistake? Like,
and then you've coffee spills all over yourself.
Nightmare.
No, but okay, so maybe not obviously 3 weeks,
sure.
but I mean even 6 months or given that
some
current
reasonable
plastic is hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yes,
we must be able to shorten the lifespan, especially single-use plastics.
So
it's the most inefficient in terms of the ratio of the time that you use it for, which is like 30 seconds or a couple of minutes, to the length of time it stays in the environment. No other material in the world has that inefficiency in its ratio.
Kind of ratio, I mean, so part of the problem is that, again, these requirements are kind of diametrically opposed to the requirements the people designing products require. So, say, one of the ideas was that we want to be able to decide when we can oxidize this product, right? We want to include some additives that will begin the decomposition. So these are like small metal components, things like iron and manganese. The problem is, by default, people include antioxidants in their plastic because if it oxidizes, it decolorizes, it begins to lose its structural rigidity. I guess this is maybe just a general over-designing of things. People will always err on the side of caution, like, maybe someone is going to want to keep this, milk carton for 10 years. Like, no, they don't care. And so it's irrelevant including those antioxidants.
Sure. So maybe we need to stop pandering to society and some of these corporations need to kind of stand up and
that's it and it's kind of difficult because this research would fundamentally be kind of high risk, right? And so trying to find industrial partners who would be willing to take that on, that isn't the norm in a lot of industrial settings, right? So
and your PhD actually at Oxford was funded by a major corporation.
It was.
So I wanted to ask you, because you were funded by a plastics industry, how does having an industrial sponsor impact, I mean, not necessarily your research, but one's research from your experience in working with industrial partners?
So it does really vary from partner to partner. Some are much more heavily involved, some are much less involved. I was quite fortunate in that our industrial partners were quite hands-off a lot of the time, and so we would meet with them about once every 3 months. So there was a degree of freedom in what we could study. I would say in my field, when you're publishing the research, you're always going to include that you got this money from the industrial collaborators. But I would say that doesn't often cause too many raised eyebrows.
Okay.
It's not like people are going to disbelieve your result because what you're doing is you're just making a thing. In chemistry, maybe less so than some of the more biological sciences, it's quite easy to demonstrate that you've made or done a thing.
You can prove your neutrality.
Yes. You can show a structure of this molecule that you said that you made, that you identified with X-rays, that is kind of just unequivocal, right? And so it's much easier to be, we made this, we did this.
That's a very valid point. I didn't think about it like that.
That's true. It's not so subjective. So therefore...
certainly lots of studies will be a lot less subjective.
So that's really good because that means that there's a lot more trust in industrial funded projects. So we don't need to worry quite so much about bias.
In chemistry,
That's excellent.
there's always this tension between what industry would like and what academia would like, because industry tend to have much lower risk appetite, and for an academic, they want a big new discovery. And these two things are kind of constantly in tension.
Right.
And trying to walk that tightrope, it can be tricky. And some people will have industrial collaborators who are a lot less willing to give room on that, and some of them are a lot more willing to give room.
And so you have some supervisors who are answerable to their sponsors and therefore put pressure on their students to,
cater to that.
Yes. With that in mind then, how do you feel about the future of plastics and the direction in which it's all heading?
I know probably people are hoping that I'm going to say 20 years, no more plastics, but I think they're going to be around for a really long time. The truth is, especially in the parts of the world that are less well off than we are, I think they're going to be really important, certainly for the rest of our lifetimes. Hopefully, we will get much better at managing the way that we deal with plastics. There's going to be this interesting moment where we begin to rely less on our fossil fuels for energy, but still have these massive reserves, which means that inherently the price of plastics is going to go down. And so there's going to be a kind of market driver to increase our production of these non-renewable plastics.
That's a terrifying thought.
Well,
but I think I've maybe been overly pessimistic. There are tons of really interesting new plastic technologies that are really going to make a huge difference, right? And so there's ways that we can take CO2, which is a byproduct of combustion, we can turn it into a plastic that is biodegradable, that will, decompose in our environment. There are ways that we can take agricultural resources, turn it into biodegradable plastics. We have these new technologies that we are developing, and they're going to start to replace some of these lazy design choices that we have.
Yeah. So it's a compromise in the middle of, yes, we should be looking towards a plastic-free solution, but in the meantime, we need a halfway compromise where we can have, like we were saying, yes, we need to get rid of fossil fuels, but, electric cars aren't feasible for everybody. So while we're waiting for a feasible, renewable energy car to come along, why don't we clean up fuel?
Sure.
And get rid of diesel and have cleaner fuel alternatives.
Yeah, and stop burning coal. Yes,
exactly.
For sure.
So actually what you're doing in the world of plastics is coming up with cleaner, better, compromise these cleaner, better plastics, which we can use whilst we're waiting for an alternative that maybe does have a more long-term environmental impact.
I think there will be a place for more environmentally responsible plastics, as far as I can see, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think these kind of biodegradable plastics that have a much smaller environmental footprint, when you look at them from cradle to grave, this full life cycle analysis, they can be really environmentally, maybe benign is the wrong word, but they're not that environmentally damaging as a material, because if we're not using them, we're using something else.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think these aren't the kind of things that are going to be hanging around in our ocean for 400 years. They're the kind of things that will decompose in 12 weeks. And so I think these kinds of plastics, we should be targeting them as a much longer term solution.
Yeah. I think what's really cool, I think what you've sort of made me feel is that we're using the word plastic to refer to a very negative thing, but actually plastics can be all sorts of different materials, many of which have these really amazing potential.
That's it. I think it's really important that people are starting to have these negative associations with plastic, because that means people will be much more conscious of how they're using it. But that's it. They're a huge class of materials.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a nice optimistic place to tie things up for that side of the conversation. Thank you.
That's really good.
So usually we finish things off with a quick fire question round. If you weren't doing what you're doing right now in the realm of chemistry, what might you be doing instead?
I would be doing something with my hands. I would be making watches or being an antique bookbinder or something. I just want to keep my hands busy, I think. I've never done either of those things, by the way.
But you know what? The way you described in your lab earlier, it is very hands-on still, and that's the commonality, I guess, between them.
Yeah, I think I'd be very bored if I wasn't making.
And what you're doing is quite constructive. You are building, and these blocks and so on. Okay, they might be microscopic or molecular, but you are building 3D things.
A maker.
Cool, thank you. So, which emerging field or technology are you most excited about?
I think batteries are absolutely huge.
Tell us more.
I think that this really important pivot point that will allow us to move away from these really polluting technologies, which are going to be huge. I actually think they're really just like the first step, but the fact that people are so willing to embrace it and that people are so excited about these companies like Tesla and about renewable energy, this is a really important step in the right direction. There's tons of really interesting research that's going on, these next generation batteries that we're not seeing in the cars, right? Like moving away from these flammable liquid electrolytes into solid electrolytes, replacing the anodes, the cathodes. There's tons of really exciting stuff that's going to be coming to our grids, our vehicles, our phones in not too long. I think this is actually a place where plastic can come in real use, actually, because batteries are a short-term storage solution, and we have no good long-term energy storage solution. The only thing is hydrocarbons. Plastics, hydrocarbons, one of the really interesting area of chemistry that people have been working on in waste management in places like China is that they are doing these waste to fuel, waste to what we call syngas, which can then be turned into other fuel. And so the plastics can act as a long-term storage of energy.
If you could wave a magic wand and have everybody suddenly understand a concept that you think is often misunderstood, what would that concept be? Catalysis. So
no hesitation there.
No. I once had a conversation with a man who was in charge of a very, very big budget for research, and he said that he wanted ideas that would change the world, and I said, I think you need catalysis. Right? Because at its core, you can get from A to B by expending a lot less energy. So we can make all the things we need to spend less energy. He said, no, what we're looking for is like solar power and like wind power, and like that's fine, but that's just...
You're like catalysis.
Because there's two ways to solve it. There's two ways you can solve the problem: make more energy or spend less energy. And it just doesn't occur that like catalysis is part of that solution, and it's just so unloved relative to these new energy generation methods.
Because it's less sexy than having like a nice roof tile.
Exactly.
That can, like harness like that.
Yeah, okay. And I guess I don't have the face of Elon Musk, so god damn it.
The face or the capital.
So we all need to have t-shirts with #catalysis.
Definitely.
Get that trending on Twitter.
Yeah, and a tattoo if you're up for it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh yes. Do you remember a moment, you talked about your sort of undergraduate studies, but do you remember a moment maybe earlier on when you were a child that you were first fascinated by science? Was there a particular moment when you sort of thought, oh, this is cool, this is for me?
So, I grew up in a big family. I have 4 older brothers. The oldest brother, he's about 7 years older than I am. And so the kind of things that he was studying at school, I guess I just kind of absorbed by osmosis. And he came home with these books and they're talking about like eggs and sperm, and I like when you're a child and you discover that there's tiny things in you that are doing all this stuff, it just blew my mind.
So cool.
Yeah.
So why aren't you a biologist?
Yeah. I guess
biology is too difficult for him.
No.
Too subjective.
You almost never have fires in biology. That's
Can't argue that.
Yeah.
That's good logic there.
I had a fire yesterday. It's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, I thought you said earlier that you're supposed to not be having fires and they're supposed to be in airtight containers.
Yeah, but sometimes things go wrong.
Love it. Okay, do you have a favourite piece of lab equipment?
Other than the fire extinguisher.
Favorite? Do you know what? It's pretty dull, but I love it.
Go on.
We have a massive 5-litre beaker. It is... I'm looking around the room, there's nothing that big in here.
This wicker basket.
Yeah, it's about as big as the big wicker basket that's behind me, which I guess is nothing if you can't see it.
Wait, what do you do with this 5-litre beaker?
Why do you need a 5-litre beaker?
So we do that thing that we were talking about at the start, methylpentylene, the scaffold that I put around the thing. Yep. We have to do it on a huge scale to make it, and it takes about 3 months, and it's a real pain. And so when we do it, we want to do it big. And so that's we have the 5-litre beaker.
It's like massive batches.
Massive batches.
It's like
how heavy is it?
Making your own beer or something.
When it's full, it's super heavy because also water has a density of 1 kilogram per meter squared.
Yeah.
But some of the solvents we use, they can be double that, right? And so 5 litres can be 10 kilos plus the weight of the glass. Like these can be heavy things, and it's swashing around and it's making you lightheaded because it's a big open surface. So
the image I have
of your
they're
wearing gloves,
lab
so it's
is
fine.
amazing.
And goggles and lab coats. Yeah.
That's like proper big scale sloshing around all these massive things of heavy metal liquids and stuff.
I don't think that's a boring piece of lab equipment at all.
No, I think I like that one.
Yeah, and you can wear it when you're bored.
So many of our...
When he's working at the lab late and he's too busy to go to the bathroom.
We're gonna
The 5 litre beaker.
Yeah.
Doing
We're going to send that quote to the people doing your Fiverr.
No.
Wear the 5 litre beaker on your head when you're bored.
But he runs around in the night.
Please pass me.
I think you've just converted a whole load of our listeners into studying inorganic chemistry.
I hope so. I hope that's all it takes.
Do you have a favourite science joke?
I think I have a favourite science joke.
Yes.
Well, okay, it's not a joke. It's more
It's not
of
about
a...
science. It's another story about myself.
Okay, never trust an atom. They make up everything.
No, I like that one.
That's good.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That is a science show.
And that is pure science. That's the basics.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
amazing. Great, thank you so much. Final one. Cucumber, yes or no?
No.
Oh.
Why?
Have you not had a no?
We've never asked this
We've
question.
never asked it because he won't let me. From the beginning, when we came up with the quickfire, the first question I wanted to ask was cucumber, yes or no? And I've wanted to ask it every time, and he doesn't let me because he said everybody would always say yes. So...
It's just water.
And plastics hate water. Right,
as a hydrophobe, you don't like cucumbers.
No time for it, yeah.
Duncan, thank you so much
Time
for coming
for-
on. It's been a blast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. You're listening to WonderLabs, polymerizing your olefin holes with catalytic goodness.
That's a wrap.